The phone rang at 12:47 in the morning, and the first sound out of it was Dalton Chadwick's voice splitting down the middle like ice under too much weight. The account ledgers are entirely wiped. Every quarter. Gone. Do you understand me? Gone. His breathing was ragged, the kind of panic a man only reaches when he believes the floor he built his whole life on has just dropped away beneath his feet. I sat up against my headboard, perfectly calm, and let the silence stretch until he filled it with my name like a prayer. And then I said the quietest, truest thing I have ever said to anyone. Who do you think set up the forensic audit watch, Dalton? The line went so silent, I could hear the refrigerator humming in his kitchen 40 miles away. He didn't know it yet, but the wire transfers he'd been hiding for 3 years had already finished uploading themselves, time-stamped and notarized, straight to the SEC. Welcome to the payback office. If stories about quiet professionals who refuse to break are worth your evening, the channel is climbing towards 7,000 subscribers. One tap on that subscribe button helps these stories reach the next person who needs to hear one. My name is Cleo Ramsey. For 4 years, I was the lead backend engineer at Horizon Financial Group. I built and maintained the systems that moved money from where it was to where it needed to be. I wrote the transaction pipelines. I designed the reconciliation logic. If a single cent landed in the wrong column at 2 in the afternoon, I was the one who found it. My father fixed industrial HVAC units in Ohio and came home smelling like copper and sweat. My mother kept the books for 3 small restaurants because the owners trusted her with the truth of their numbers. We had enough. What we did not have was the luxury of looking past people. In my house, you learned early that the man emptying the trash had a name and a story, and you asked about both. Humility was simply the water we swam in. That upbringing turned out to be the single most useful thing I ever carried into Horizon. When you're raised to actually see people, you also notice the things they assume you're too unimportant to catch. You notice when a man stops making eye contact. You notice when the numbers stop breathing the way numbers are supposed to. Horizon was a mid-sized financial services firm in Charlotte. We had a glass lobby, a wall of awards, and a CEO who liked to be photographed in front of both. Dalton Chadwick had founded the firm 19 years earlier. He was tall in a way that filled doorways, silver at the temples in a way that looked engineered, and he had a gift for making whoever he was speaking to feel like the only competent person in the building. Right up until the moment he no longer needed them. I watched him do it to vendors, to junior analysts, to a board member once. The warmth was real while it lasted and evaporated the instant it stopped being useful. I clocked that about him in my first year and filed it away. For a long time, none of it touched me. I was useful, and Dalton was careful to keep useful things close. He called me the backbone of the operation, which I knew was the kind of compliment men like him hand out precisely because a backbone is something you stand on, not something you look at. Then, about 8 months before that midnight phone call, the numbers stopped breathing right. A reconciliation job I had written to run at 3 a.m. came back clean every single night. Too clean, the way a room is too clean when someone has wiped it down on purpose. There was a category of internal transfer, vendor settlements, that my system was supposed to flag for review whenever the amount crossed a threshold. For months, not a single one had crossed. In a firm our size, with the money we moved, that was the equivalent of saying it had not rained once all year. I did not say anything to anyone. The fastest way to get yourself escorted out of a building is to walk into a senior executive's office with a theory and no proof. My mother taught me, you do not accuse, you reconcile. You let the numbers say it for you, in their own flat, unarguable voice. So I started watching, quietly the way I do everything. I went back into the reconciliation logic I had written 2 years earlier. What I found made the back of my neck go cold. Somebody had modified the threshold parameters on the vendor settlement flags. They had raised the ceiling so high that no realistic transfer would ever trip the alert. A settlement of $40,000 used to get reviewed. Now the line sat at $4 million. Anything underneath sailed straight through, unseen, unquestioned. The change had been made through an administrative account, and the administrative account belonged to the office of the CEO. I sat at my desk in a half-empty floor at 7 in the evening, the cleaning crew working their way down the hall, and I felt my stomach drop. Because there are discoveries you cannot undiscover. The instant I knew, I was no longer a woman who could pretend not to know. I thought about my father then. A winter when I was 12, a building manager asked him to certify that a heating system was up to code so the man could rent the units out. The system was not up to code. My father refused. Lost the contract over it. We ate cheaper that month and he never once complained. When I asked him why, he said, "Cleo, your name is the only thing in this world nobody can take from you unless you hand it over. So don't hand it over." I was not going to hand mine over to Dalton Chadwick. But I was not going to be reckless either. The threshold change told me the door had been left unlocked. It did not tell me what was walking through it. So I built something. Over the next several weeks, working early mornings and late nights, I wrote a quiet little watcher. A forensic logging routine that sat underneath the main system like a second floor beneath the first. It did not interfere with anything. It simply observed. Every vendor settlement, every wire instruction, every modification to the ledger, the amount, the timestamp, the originating account, the destination, and it wrote all of it to a location outside Horizon's main infrastructure, in an encrypted store that answered only to a key I kept on a drive that never left my person. The numbers made comfort impossible within 9 days. The vendor settlements were going to a cluster of LLCs with names that meant nothing. Pinnacle Strategic Holdings, Cardinal Vantage Partners, Greywater Consulting. Clean, corporate, forgettable names designed to slide past a tired eye on a spreadsheet. I pulled public records from my own apartment, on my own machine, careful to keep Horizon's network out of it entirely. Most had been incorporated within the last 3 years. None had a real website. 2 shared a registered agent at the same address in Delaware. And every single one traced back, through a thin paper membrane of holding entities, to the same beneficial owner. It was him, of course it was him. Dalton had built a circulatory system that pulled money out of client settlements in pieces small enough to disappear and large enough to matter, routed it through shell companies he controlled, and washed it clean. He had done it by reaching into the very system I had built and quietly turning off the alarm. He had used my own work to blind the company to his theft. He did not know me at all. He knew the version of me that nodded in meetings and fixed problems before they reached him. He had never once considered that the person who could build the watchtower could also decide where to point it. I kept the watcher running, I told no one, and I waited. The reason to move arrived on a Tuesday, wrapped in good news. Dalton called me into his office at the end of the day. "Cleo," he said, warm as a fireplace, "I've been thinking about the gala." The gala was Horizon's annual event, a black-tie thing downtown where the firm trotted out its best numbers and handed out internal awards. Theater. Dalton loved it the way some men love a stage. "I want you up front this year," he said. "We're recognizing the technology team's work on the reconciliation platform. You built the backbone of that. I want the room to see the face behind it." He smiled at me then, the full thing, all teeth and sincerity. It's time people knew who Cleo Ramsey is. The smile he gave me did not reach the muscles around his eyes. It was a smile he had decided on, not one that had happened to him. I thanked him. I said I was honored. I said all the right things, because the safest place to stand near Dalton Chadwick was directly inside his blind spot, nodding. But something was wrong, and I went home and I could not shake it. So I went back to the data, but this time not the financial ledgers. I went into the document systems, the access logs, the quiet administrative trails that most executives forget exist. I was not looking for money anymore. I was looking for myself. What I found was a folder. It had been created 11 days earlier in a shared HR directory. It would have been hidden from someone at my level, except that 2 years prior I had been the one who set up the permissions architecture, and I had built myself a maintenance pathway. I had never used it. I used it that night. The folder was named with my employee ID. Inside it were 3 documents. The first was a draft termination letter. My name, my title, an effective date set for the Monday after the gala. The stated reason, gross negligence and unauthorized modification of financial systems resulting in material data integrity failures. He was going to fire me for the very thing he had done. He was going to stand in that ballroom, put me in front of the entire firm and its biggest clients, smile that engineered smile, and then 4 days later walk me out of the building with my name stapled to his crime. When the auditors eventually came, there would be a tidy paper trail showing that the lead engineer had tampered with the reconciliation system, had been caught, and had been removed. The threshold changes made through his administrative account would become mine in his story. The shell company transfers, the losses, all of it would land on the woman who had inconveniently understood the system better than anyone else. I was not a person to him, I was a fire exit, a way out of a building he had set alight himself. The second document was a memo to outside counsel, laying out the case against me in clinical language. A rogue engineer operating without oversight. The third document was a list titled Transition Items, things to handle once I was gone, reassign system credentials, revoke repository access, audit her commits, and the last line, confirm she had no external copies. He was worried about external copies. I sat there in the blue light of my own kitchen at 1 a.m, and I felt the fear drain out of me and something steadier take its place. Because he was right to worry. There were external copies, months of them, sitting in an encrypted store, including every single change ever made through his administrative account. He thought he was setting a trap. He did not understand that he was walking into one I had built underneath his feet 2 seasons before he ever thought to dig my grave. I closed the folder. I left no trace that I had been inside it, and then I did the hardest thing, which was nothing. I went to work the next morning and I smiled at Dalton Chadwick in the hallway and I told him I was excited about the gala. Because I had a little under 2 weeks, and I was going to need every hour of it. There is a particular kind of calm that comes over you when you stop hoping a situation will resolve itself and accept that you are going to have to be the one to resolve it. I sat down at my own kitchen table, never at the office, never on Horizon's network, and I made a list of what would have to be true for the truth to survive contact with a man like Dalton Chadwick. First, the evidence could not depend on me. Dalton's entire strategy rested on the assumption that he controlled the story because he controlled the systems. Anything I personally handed to anyone, he could reframe as the desperate fabrication of a disgruntled engineer he was already firing for tampering. My word against his was a fight I would lose. So the evidence could not come from me. It had to arrive somewhere he did not control, from a source he could not impeach. Second, the timing could not be mine to fumble. If I moved too early, I tipped him off. If I moved too late, I was already terminated, already branded, and anything that surfaced would look like sour grapes. I thought about it for 3 days, and then I understood what I had been building all along. The watcher I had written was passive. It sat in the dark and wrote down everything it saw and waited for someone to come ask it what it knew. The problem, the only someone who knew it existed was me. If I was the one who produced its testimony, Dalton would say I had written every line of it myself the night before. What I needed was for the witness to speak on its own, without me in the room. I needed it to reach the one audience whose attention Dalton Chadwick could not buy, charm, or fire. I needed it to talk directly to the regulators. Horizon lived under the watch of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Dalton had spent years making sure nothing irregular ever reached those channels, because he controlled the system that decided what counted as irregular. So I was going to give it new eyes. Over the next several days, I rebuilt the watcher. It would no longer simply observe and store. It would evaluate. I wrote a forensic audit routine that compared every vendor settlement against the historical patterns of legitimate settlements. The ones from before the threshold had been quietly raised. It learned what honest money looked like. And then it watched for the money that did not look like that. And when the routine confirmed a pattern that crossed the legal threshold for a reportable irregularity, not my opinion, but the actual regulatory definition, it would file. Automatically. It would package the whole forensic record and transmit it directly to the SEC, with cryptographic timestamps proving exactly when each piece of evidence had been recorded. Not the night before, not by a cornered woman. Months earlier, in real time, as the crimes were actually happening. I set it to arm itself on a trigger. The routine would stay dormant until the moment someone reached in to destroy the historical ledgers themselves. The originals, the records that proved what the numbers used to look like before he started bleeding them. Because I knew Dalton. The night he believed he had finally cornered me, he would do the one thing a guilty man cannot resist doing. He would reach for the cleanup. He would try to wipe the ledgers, to make sure that when I was gone there was nothing left to contradict his version of events. He would pull the trigger himself, and he would have no idea that pulling it was the last free thing he would ever do. I finished the routine the Thursday before the gala. I tested it in isolation until I was certain. Then I let it go quiet, sitting underneath everything, patient as a held breath, and I went to get my dress for Saturday night. The ballroom on Saturday night looked exactly the way Dalton wanted everything in his life to look. Expensive, polished, and arranged so that the light fell on him. There were ice sculptures. There was a string quartet. I arrived in a dark green dress my mother would have approved of, and a calm that surprised even me. I knew what was in the folder with my employee ID on it. I knew that the man crossing the room to greet me was planning to put my name on his crime and walk me out in 48 hours. And yet, I felt no urge to flinch. I felt the way you feel when you have already checked the math 3 times and you know the answer is right. There is a peace in that. There she is, Dalton said, taking my hand in both of his. The woman of the hour, he leaned in close. I mean it, Cleo. None of this works without you. I thanked him. I let him steer me toward the front of the room. The recognition came midway through the evening. Dalton took the small stage with a microphone and did the thing he was genuinely gifted at, tell a story that made everyone in the room feel like they were part of something larger. He talked about vision. He talked about trust. He talked about the responsibility of safeguarding other people's money, about how the firm's reputation rested on the integrity of its systems. I stood at the side of the stage and listened to a man describe the very thing he was stealing as the thing he held most sacred. And then he called my name. Our reconciliation platform is the backbone of everything we do here, he said. And the architect of that backbone is a woman whose work most of you have never seen, because the best engineering is invisible. You only notice it when it fails. Well, it has never failed. Cleo Ramsey, come up here. I walked up into the light and the room applauded. Dalton put his hand on my shoulder for the photograph. The cameras flashed. I smiled the real smile this time, not because of anything he said, but because of what I knew was sitting silent and patient underneath all of it, waiting. He handed me a small glass award with my name etched into it. In recognition of engineering excellence. I still have it. I keep it on a shelf where I can see it, because there is a particular justice in a guilty man having his crime memorialized in his own handwriting, etched in glass, dated the night before everything came apart. I said a few words. I thanked the team. I thanked my parents. And I stepped down, and the evening rolled on, and at no point did the warmth ever leave Dalton's face, because in his mind the hard part was over. I went home a little after 11. I took off the green dress and hung it carefully. I set the glass award on the kitchen counter where the streetlight caught it. I made myself a cup of tea, the way my mother always did when something important was happening. And I sat at my kitchen table in the dark, and I waited. I did not have to wait long. Because Dalton was not a patient man. He was a man who, the moment he believed he had won, could not resist tidying the board. Somewhere in the back of his mind, all night, a thought had been itching at him. The historical ledgers, the originals, the records that still held the shape of honest money. As long as those existed, there was a version of events that did not end the way he needed it to end. He could not walk me out on Monday and leave those sitting there. At 41 minutes past midnight, on the drive in my pocket, the watcher woke up. I had built it to be independent of me on purpose, but I had left myself one small thread, a single, silent notification. My phone lit up once on the dark kitchen table, one soft pulse of light. I did not even pick it up right away. I just looked at it, and I felt the whole long 8 months settle into place like a key finally turning. He had reached for the ledgers. And the moment he did, the forensic record had already begun transmitting itself to the SEC. Not from me, from the system, from a witness that had been writing everything down since long before either of us stood in that ballroom. 6 minutes later, my phone rang. The screen said Dalton Chadwick. I let it ring twice, then I picked it up. The account ledgers are entirely wiped. His voice came through stripped of everything I had heard in the ballroom 4 hours earlier. No warmth, no performance. Just a man, alone in his kitchen, watching the floor drop out from under 19 years of carefully arranged lies. Every quarter, gone, do you understand me, Cleo? Gone. I held the phone against my ear and looked at the glass award catching the streetlight on my counter, and I let him keep going. I need you to come in, he said. Tonight, right now. The whole ledger system, the historical records, something's corrupted it, it's all blank, and you're the only one who knows that architecture well enough to, he caught himself. You built it. You can fix it. Whatever it costs, whatever you need, just get it back. And there it was. The man who had a termination letter waiting for me was calling me at 1 a.m. to beg me to undo the very destruction he had just caused. I could have let him keep going, but I found I did not want it. What I wanted was for him to understand, just once, that the person he had decided was too small to see had been the one holding the whole thing in her hands the entire time. So I asked him the question, quietly, almost gently. Who do you think set up the forensic audit watch, Dalton? The silence that came back was not the silence of a bad connection. It was the silence of a man's entire understanding of his situation rearranging itself in real time. I could hear him replaying the evening, the ballroom, the award, the hand on my shoulder, and reassembling all of it into a shape he had not seen until this exact second. What did you do? He said finally. His voice had gone flat and small. I didn't do anything, I told him. I wrote something that watches, months ago. It watches the ledgers, and it watches every change anyone makes through the administrative accounts. It doesn't have opinions, Dalton. It just keeps records. Honest ones. The kind that show what the money looked like before someone raised the thresholds and what it looked like after, and exactly which account made the change and when. I let that sit for a moment. It's very patient. It's been waiting for someone to delete the originals. That was always going to be the moment it mattered most. So I told it that when that happened, it should make sure the right people had a copy. What right people? Barely a whisper now. The ones whose job it is to look at firms like ours, I said. It finished transmitting a little while ago, around the time you were dialing my number, I'd guess. There was a long pause, and then the old instinct came roaring back, the deal maker, the charmer. You don't understand, Dalton said. Cleo, listen to me. Whatever you think you saw, there's context. These are complicated transactions, and a system, an automated system, it doesn't understand context. We can fix this. Tonight. I'll make it worth your while. Name it, a title, a number. Whatever you've been wanting, it's yours. And that was the moment I understood that he was never going to be sorry. Not really. He was offering me, right now, the exact thing he had been planning to take from me on Monday, as though it had ever been his to give. Dalton, I said, I don't want a title. Then what? He said. What do you want? I thought about it, and I gave him the most honest answer I had. I want the records to be true, I said. That's all, that was always all. The records are true now, I don't need anything else from you. And I hung up. I sat in the dark for a while after that. My phone buzzed twice more him, calling back, and I turned it face down and let it. There was nothing left to say that the system had not already said, in the only language that could not be charmed or reframed or fired. The Monday that was supposed to be my last day at Horizon arrived, and I went to work. I was not going to hide. I had done nothing wrong. The termination never came. By Monday morning, Dalton Chadwick had far larger problems than a draft letter sitting in a folder. He was not in the office. The official word was that the CEO was attending to an urgent personal matter. The unofficial word was that something was very wrong at the top of the company. I knew what, but I said nothing, and I did my job, and I waited. It took 11 days for the first regulators to walk through the glass lobby Dalton loved so much. They did not announce themselves to the floor. But you cannot bring that many serious people in dark suits into a building without the building noticing. The forensic record had done exactly what I built it to do. It had handed them a complete, time-stamped, cryptographically verified map of 3 years of wire fraud. Every transfer, every dollar pulled from client settlements and washed through shell companies that traced back to a single beneficial owner. They did not have to take anyone's word for it. The records were evidence, dated to the moment each crime occurred, recorded in real time by a system with no stake in the outcome and no reason to lie. There was nothing for Dalton to charm. That was the part that broke him. His entire life had been a series of rooms he talked his way out of. But you cannot talk your way out of a timestamp. You cannot flatter a cryptographic hash. The numbers did not care how warm he was. They simply said what had happened when and through whose account. I was interviewed. I told them the truth, all of it, plainly and completely. I walked them through the threshold modifications. I explained the watcher, what it observed, how it recorded, why I had built it, and what it had been waiting for. I did not editorialize. I had learned a long time ago that the truth is most powerful when you let it stand on its own. One of the investigators, near the end of a long afternoon, set down her pen and looked at me. She asked me why I had built the watch in the first place, back at the beginning, before I had any proof. I thought about my father, and the heating system he refused to certify, and the thing he said about my name being the only thing nobody can take unless you hand it over. Because the numbers stopped breathing right, I told her. And I was raised to notice when something stops breathing right, and to not look away from it just because looking is inconvenient. She nodded slowly, and she picked her pen back up, and she wrote that down. The fallout moved the way these things move, slowly, and then all at once. Dalton was placed on leave, then removed, then charged. The board brought in outside leadership and an army of auditors. There were difficult weeks. Clients pulled accounts. The wall of awards came down, quietly, one afternoon. The glass lobby stayed, but it stopped feeling like a stage. And through all of it, I kept doing my job, because the systems still needed to run. That was still my work, and the work was still good, and the work was still mine. The new leadership, once the dust began to settle, asked to meet with me. The woman they brought in to lead Horizon through the wreckage was named Deora Whitfield, and she was nothing like Dalton Chadwick. She did not stand at the glass with her back half-turned. She sat down across a plain table from me and looked at me directly when she spoke. "I've read the forensic record," she said. "All of it. I've also read a draft termination letter that was sitting in a folder with your name on it, dated the Monday after the gala." She let that sit for a moment. "He was going to put his crime on you and walk you out in front of every client we have. And instead of running, or leaking, or doing any of the dozen things a person in your position would have been entitled to do, you built something that told the truth on its own, and you kept coming to work." I did not know what to say to that, so I said the true thing. I just wanted the records to be accurate. "I know," she said. "That's exactly why I want you to run them." She offered me the role of Chief Technology Officer. Not as a reward, she was careful to say, but because the firm was about to spend years rebuilding trust, and the only way to do that was to put people who valued the truth in the rooms where decisions got made. I asked for a day to think about it. Not because I was unsure, but because my mother taught me that you should never accept anything important in the same breath it is offered. I took the job. That was some time ago now. The firm is smaller than it was under Dalton and quieter, and I think it is better for both. We move other people's money from where it is to where it needs to be, accurately. The first thing I did was build the kind of system Horizon should always have had, one where no single person, not even me, can quietly turn off the alarm. The point was never to catch one guilty man. The point was to build something honest enough that the next guilty man never gets the chance. Dalton's case worked its way through the system. The wire fraud the watch recorded was not the kind of thing a charming man talks his way out of. He answered for what he did. I did not attend. I had no need to watch it. People ask me sometimes whether I felt triumphant, whether there was a moment of victory, and I tell them the truth, which is no, there was never triumph. There was only the quiet, settling weight of a true thing landing where it belonged. I did not beat Dalton Chadwick. I simply refused to let his version of events be the one that survived, and I built something patient enough to outlast his charm. That is not revenge. This was quieter than that, and cleaner, and it left no mark on me at all. It just left the records true. The Glass Award still sits on my shelf, etched with his handwriting and dated the night before everything came apart. I keep it there on purpose, not as a trophy. As a reminder that the people who get talked over and written off as harmless are very often the ones holding the whole thing in their hands, and that competence and a clear conscience will outlast a power play every single time if you're only patient enough to let them. My name is Cleo Ramsey. I am the CTO of Horizon Financial Group. I came from a house where an honest woman kept honest books, and I have spent my life making sure the records are true. That is the whole story. If this one landed the way it was meant to, the Payback office has more where that came from. The subscribe button is right there, and these stories don't reach the people who need them without your help. Thanks for listening.